Why did Ivy Marrow choose the one cowboy whose door she had spent 2 years refusing to need? The roof cracked like a rifle shot. Snow burst across Ivy's kitchen as the north wall bowed inward. Half frozen, she stumbled through a whiteout and struck Emmett Larkin's door with her forearm. When it opened, her knees gave way. But what she offered him after waking by his fire would test them both. Would you have knocked on his door? Tell me below. The nail came loose with a sound like a pistol crack. Ivy Marrow flinched as the board above her jumped free. A blast of snow struck her face and scattered across the kitchen table beneath her boots. For 1 second, she stood frozen. Then the roof groaned again. "No," she muttered. "Not tonight." She reached higher, trying to force the board back across the widening seam in the north corner. Her fingers had gone stiff inside her wool gloves. Every hammer blow landed weaker than the one before it. Outside, January had swallowed the Dakota prairie. By sundown, the fence posts had disappeared. Now the wind drove snow sideways across the claim, rattling shutters and pressing against the little house her father had built 20 years before. Ivy had already barred the chicken coop. The cow was sheltered. Feed had been carried inside before dark. Her father's papers were wrapped in oilcloth beneath the bed. His pocket watch rested inside her coat. Everything that mattered was accounted for. Except the roof. Another gust struck. The board tore completely from Ivy's hands. She ducked as it sailed across the kitchen. Snow poured through the opening. Ivy climbed down and dragged the table away. For 3 winters, since burying her father, she had handled whatever this land demanded. Frozen pumps, sick livestock, broken fencing. Loneliness so complete she sometimes spoke to the chickens just to hear a human voice. She had never gone across the field asking Emmett Larkin to rescue her. Half a mile separated their claims. For 2 years, that half mile had suited them both. Emmett waved when they passed along the boundary fence. He spoke when there was something worth saying. Most important, he never treated a woman living alone as an invitation to manage her affairs. Then the kitchen wall made a deep cracking sound. Ivy turned. The north wall had bowed inward. Her breath stopped. Pride could argue with a leaking roof. It could not argue with a wall preparing to come down. She pulled on her heavy coat, wrapped a wool shawl over her head, banked the stove out of habit, and stood at the door with one hand on the latch. Going outside was dangerous. Staying had become worse. Ivy touched the watch in her pocket. "All right, Papa." She opened the door. The storm hit hard enough to drive her backward. The half-mile to Emmett's ranch became a world without distance. Fence posts appeared and vanished. Snow filled her boot tops. Twice she fell. The second time she stayed on one knee longer than she should have. Then her glove struck wire, the boundary fence. Ivy followed it until a faint yellow square trembled through the white. Emmett's window. By the time she reached his porch, she could no longer close her fingers. She struck the door with her forearm. Once. Before she managed the second blow, it opened. Emmett Larkin stood in lamplight, shirt sleeves rolled above his wrists. His face changed when he saw her. "Ivy." He had said her name before. Never like that. Her knees gave way. Emmett caught her without another word. He brought her to the stove, fed split cottonwood into the fire, and set a kettle on. Only after the flames were climbing did he disappear into the bedroom and return with a clean flannel shirt and an old pair of trousers. "Room's yours. Change before those clothes freeze on you." He turned his back. When Ivy returned, his shirt hung nearly to her knees. The sleeves covered her hands. She caught him looking. "If you say one word about these sleeves, I'll go back outside." Wasn't going to. His gaze dropped to them again. They appear to be winning already. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Emmett handed her a tin cup of coffee. Ivy took one swallow and stared at him. "How much sugar did you put in this?" "You were half frozen. So you decided to finish me another way?" This time he did smile. Only a little. It changed his whole face. The warmth made Ivy's hands begin to ache as feeling returned. "Roof went," she said. "North corner." Wall started bowing. "You did right coming here." The words were simple. Still, something in her resisted how badly she had needed to hear them. An hour later, the wind had worsened. There would be no walking home that night. Emmett carried a blanket to the chair beside the stove. Ivy frowned. "What are you doing?" "Sleeping. You have a bed. So do you. Tonight it's the same one. I won't put you out of your own room." "You're not." Ivy looked past him toward the kitchen. A sack of flour, salt pork, beans, coffee, one onion beginning to soften near the stove. A bachelor's pantry, if she'd ever seen one. She straightened. "I'll cook if you let me stay." Emmett studied her. "You don't owe me supper for keeping you out of the snow." "I didn't say I owed you." "You're bargaining." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I sleep better when I know the terms." Something quiet passed through his eyes. Then he nodded. "All right, you cook." Ivy reached for the flour. "But you don't have to earn the right to survive under my roof." Her hand stopped. She said nothing. Later, over biscuits, beans, and the last of the salt pork, 2 years of careful distance began wearing thin. Ivy asked why he'd never married. "Loud company never suited me." "And quiet company?" His eyes settled on her. "Hard to find." Ivy turned her father's watch between her fingers. She told him about the man back east who had once intended to marry her. When her father fell ill, Ivy took over the accounts, dealt with suppliers, made decisions. Her fiancé had not admired it. He said a wife ought to need looking after. The watch ticked between them. When he learned I could manage without him, he decided there wasn't much place for him. Emmett stared into the fire. Ivy waited for him to tell her that man had been a fool. He didn't. Instead, he said, "Needing help once in a blizzard doesn't undo 3 years of proving you don't need it most days." Ivy looked at him. The wind hammered the house near midnight. She moved from the chair across the hearth and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ivy said, "I've spent 3 years telling myself I'd rather freeze alone than admit I needed anybody." Emmett waited. "Tonight I walked half a mile through that storm," her voice dropped. "And somehow I knew exactly whose door I trusted enough to knock on." His eyes met hers. "I'm glad it was mine." Ivy hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, she rested against his shoulder. "I feel safer with you." Emmett did not reach for her. He did not turn the moment into something she had not offered. He simply remained there, warm and steady, while the fire burned lower. Outside, the blizzard erased the fence, the road, and every visible trace of the half-mile that had separated their lives. By dawn, the wind would stop, and Ivy would learn that surviving the night had been the easy part. The silence woke her. After hours of wind clawing at Emmett Larkin's ranch house, the stillness felt unnatural. Ivy opened her eyes in his narrow bedroom and stared at a pale strip of morning beneath the curtain. For one confused moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw Emmett's flannel shirt hanging loose around her wrists. She remembered everything. The storm, his door, the fire. "I feel safer with you." Ivy closed her eyes. She had said that aloud. When she entered the main room, Emmett was already pulling on his boots beside the stove. A fresh pot of coffee sat near the fire. He looked toward her. "Morning." "Is it?" "Appears to be." Ivy went to the window. The prairie had become an endless white sheet. Fence rails surfaced here and there like black bones. "I need to see my place." "I know." He did not tell her to wait. He did not tell her what she could handle. He simply reached for his coat. They crossed the half-mile together. What Ivy found stopped her at the doorway. The north corner of the roof was gone. Snow lay knee-deep across the kitchen floor. One chair had broken beneath fallen timber. The stove was cold, its iron top covered in white powder. Worse, the north wall leaned inward enough that daylight showed along one edge. Emmett studied it. "Don't trust that wall yet." "I don't." Ivy stepped carefully through the wreckage. Then she stopped. Her hand went to her coat pocket. Empty. "The watch," Emmett turned. "My father's watch." She dropped to her knees and began digging through the snow near the table. "I had it last night." "I know I did." Emmett joined her without saying that a watch could be replaced. They found it near the stove beneath a drift of snow and splintered wood. Ivy wiped the face with her sleeve. The glass was fogged. She held it close. Tick, a pause. Tick, her mouth trembled into a small smile. Still keeping poor time. Emmett glanced at her. "Seems determined about it." She swallowed and slipped the watch safely inside her coat. By noon, they had seen enough. The house could be repaired, but Ivy could not sleep there until the wall and roof were made sound. She hated hearing herself admit it. Emmett made the matter easier by not celebrating the conclusion. 2 mornings later, he drove across the field with a wagon loaded with pine boards from his own shed. Ivy was waiting beside the gate. She had a notebook in her hand. Emmett climbed down and eyed it. "What's that?" "Accounts." "For what?" "Every board, every nail, anything else you bring over." He leaned against the wagon. "You planning to charge me for breakfast?" Ivy frowned. "No." "Coffee?" "Of course not." "Then your accounts are already crooked." She almost smiled. Emmett handed her the first board. "Write down the lumber if it makes you feel better, but every supper you feed me while I'm working goes in there too." "That's different." "Why?" Ivy opened her mouth. Nothing useful came out. Emmett nodded toward the notebook. "Thought so." She recorded every board. She never recorded a single meal. What his own stores could not supply took them into town to Silas Cobb's lumberyard, where stacks of pine and cedar stood beneath roofs heavy with old snow. Silas looked over Ivy's list, then at Emmett's wagon. "Your lumber?" "My house," Ivy said. Silas pointed his pencil toward Emmett, his team. "For today." His hands, too, from the looks of them. Emmett rested both palms on the counter. "You selling boards or conducting marriages?" "At my age, a man ought to diversify." Ivy turned away before either man saw her smile. Mrs. Fenwick was less subtle. She arrived 3 days later from the mercantile with the nails Ivy had ordered before the storm. She found Ivy holding a brace while Emmett drove it into place. The widow watched them for perhaps 10 seconds. "You two intend to make the whole territory wait until summer?" Ivy looked over. "For what?" "Never mind. You'll catch up." She set down the nails and drove away. Emmett waited until her wagon disappeared. "She isn't wrong about us being slow." Ivy gave him a look. He returned to his hammer. The real argument came over the kitchen wall. "I want it where Papa put it," Ivy said. "Same place is fine. Same bracing isn't. It stood 20 years. And one January nearly put it in your lap." Ivy's jaw tightened. Emmett saw it. He put the hammer down. "Come here." She folded her arms. "I'm already here." "Then come 3 feet closer and argue with the wood instead of me." He showed her where the old brace had twisted and how a cross brace would spread the force along 2 studs. Ivy crouched beside him. She asked one question, then another. Finally, she ran her fingers over the split timber. "Your way is stronger." "Yes." She pointed toward the old doorway. "That stays exactly where my father put it." Emmett picked up his hammer. "Your house, your decision." Ivy watched him return to work. No triumph, no reminder that he had been right. Something inside her loosened. Days became weeks. One cold afternoon, she noticed Emmett rubbing his right shoulder when he thought she wasn't looking. That evening, she repaired the torn seam in his work coat. The following day, she carried a covered pot of stew across the field and left it on his porch. He appeared before she reached the gate. "You didn't need to do that." Ivy turned. "I know." She looked at him for a moment. "I did it anyway." Emmett said nothing, but the next morning he lingered over coffee so long it went cold. That evening, as winter light faded behind the prairie, he finally spoke. 2 years. Ivy looked up from the mending in her lap. "What about them?" 2 years I watched you handle everything alone and told myself staying out of your way was respect. Wasn't it? Some of it. And the rest? Emmett rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cup. Cowardice, probably. Ivy's needle stopped. He looked toward the dark line of fence outside. Easier admiring a fence from a distance than finding out it doesn't want mending. Ivy stared at him. That may be the most complicated way a man has ever admitted he was afraid to speak to a woman. I had 2 years to practice. Her laugh came softly. For the first time, neither of them looked away. And for the first time since the storm, Ivy began to wonder whether kindness could arrive without a bill attached to it. She was almost ready to believe it. Then Emmett Larkin went into Silas Cobb's lumber yard, saw a stack of good shingles marked down for quick sale, and made one small decision without asking her. Silas stood behind the counter with a pencil tucked over one ear. "Those are the size she's using." "I know. Price drops again Saturday." "They'll be gone by Saturday." Silas studied him. "Miss Marrow tell you to buy them?" Emmett's hand stopped over his money. Only for a second. "No." Silas said nothing more. That should have been warning enough. But Emmett had spent weeks hauling boards with Ivy, drinking her coffee, arguing over nails, and learning when her silence meant no, and when it merely meant she was thinking. The shingles were good. She needed them. He bought them. The following afternoon, Ivy heard wagon wheels crunching over packed snow. She stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands. Emmett was coming through the gate. For one unguarded moment, she smiled. Then she saw the wagon bed. Bundles of shingles. Her smile disappeared. Emmett noticed. "I found them cheap at Cobb's." "I didn't order shingles." "No. Silas had these marked down. Same size we measured for." "You bought them?" Price was too good to leave them. Ivy looked from him to the wagon. Something old moved beneath her ribs. Not memory exactly. More like the feeling memory left behind. A man back east placing papers in front of her and saying he'd already decided what was sensible. A purchase made because he knew better. A favor offered before the price of it was named. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know." Emmett climbed down. "I thought it'd save you money." "That's not the point." His expression changed. Ivy folded her arms tightly. "You knew I needed something, so you decided I'd take it." "Ivy," without asking. He looked at the shingles, then back at her. "I can put them in the ledger." That made everything worse. "The ledger?" "I meant, that's exactly the kind of thing he used to do." The words landed before she could stop them. Emmett went still. Even the prairie seemed to quiet around them. One horse shifted in the traces. Leather creaked. Ivy heard her own breathing. Emmett's face did not harden. That would have been easier. Instead, something simply closed behind his eyes. "I'm not him, Ivy." "I know." But she had said it too quickly. Too late. Emmett rested one hand on their wagon rail. "If you want the shingles, tell me, and I'll bring them back." She swallowed. "And if I don't?" "I'll return them." He climbed onto the seat. Ivy took one step toward him. "Emmett," he waited. There were half a dozen things she might have said. "I'm sorry. I was frightened. You aren't him. Please don't go." Pride found all of them before they reached her mouth. "I didn't ask for them," she said instead. Emmett nodded once. No, you didn't. The wagon turned toward the gate. He did not come the next morning. Ivy told herself she hadn't expected him. By 9, she had looked toward his ranch 6 times. At noon, she made coffee and reached automatically for a second tin cup. Her hand stopped. She put it back. The following day, she saw Emmett half a mile away, repairing his own fence. Even at that distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders. He never crossed the field. He had finally done exactly what she had spent 2 years training him to do. He had listened. Mrs. Fenwick came by with lamp oil and noticed the unfinished section of roof. Emmett sick? No. Busy? I expect so. The widow looked toward the Larkin place. Ivy's expression ended the conversation. 3 days later, Ivy went to town for nails. Silas Cobb counted out the change. Larkin brought those shingles back. Ivy's fingers paused over the coins. I didn't ask. No. Silas slid the receipt across the counter. Paid the difference, too. Sale stock wasn't meant for returns. Ivy looked at him. Silas only tucked his pencil behind his ear. That's all I know. She rode home angry. Not at Emmett. That made it worse. She finished the next section of wall herself. She hauled boards, cut braces, climbed the ladder. When snow threatened one afternoon, she worked until dusk to cover the remaining opening. Nobody rescued her. Nobody had to. Within the week, the roof held against a hard north wind. Ivy stood beneath it listening. No leak. No groaning timber. No snow on her father's table. She had done it. That evening she made stew. Without thinking, she filled the pot the way she had during the weeks Emmett worked beside her. Enough for 2. She stared at it for a long time. Later she sat at the table with 1 bowl and 1 cup. Across the dark field, a lamp burned in Emmett's window. The house around Ivy was nearly sound again. It had walls, a roof, a stove throwing good heat. Her cattle were fed. Her accounts were hers. No man had made a decision for her that day. She owed nobody an explanation. She had everything she had spent 3 years protecting. Yet the place felt emptier now than when the storm had torn half the kitchen open. Ivy lowered her spoon. That was when the truth finally found her. She did not miss Emmett because she needed his hammer. She did not miss his wagon, or his lumber, or his roof. She missed the man who drank coffee too slowly when he wanted to remain at her table. The man who could disagree with her and still say, your house, your decision. The man she had wounded by comparing his kindness to someone else's control. And that frightened her more than dependence ever had. Because she could survive perfectly well without Emmett Larkin. She simply no longer wanted to. Her gaze moved to the small notebook lying beside her father's watch. The ledger. Ivy pulled it toward her. She meant to calculate every board, every nail, every remaining cent she owed him. Instead, she opened to the first page and stopped. January 19th, 12 pine boards. January 21st, 2 pounds of nails. January 24th, wagon use to Cobb's yard. Ivy turned the page. More figures, more careful marks in her own hand. Every item neat enough that her father would have approved. Then the entries began to thin. There was nothing beside the afternoon Emmett had stayed until dark, rebuilding the north wall. Nothing for the stew she carried to his porch. Nothing for the coat she mended. Nothing for the mornings when 1 cup of coffee became 2, and neither of them seemed in much hurry to start working. She turned another page. Blank. Ivy sat back. The house was quiet except for the stove and the small uneven ticking beside her elbow. Her father's watch. Tick. A pause. Tick, still keeping poor time, still moving. She remembered Emmett crouched beside the damaged wall, setting down his hammer instead of using it to end an argument. Your house, your decision. She remembered his coat folded beneath her hands. You didn't need to do that. I know. I did it anyway. Ivy looked down at the ledger again. She had started the book because numbers were safe. A board cost what a board cost. A nail could be counted. A debt could be paid. Once paid, nobody could return years later and claim more. But she had never written down the things that mattered. Not because she had forgotten, because somewhere along the way, she had stopped believing they belonged in an account. Ivy closed the ledger. She remained at the table another minute. Then she rose. Her repaired roof stood firm above her. The cattle had been fed. The stove was banked. Her house was hers again. There was no storm outside, no wall preparing to fall, no reason at all to leave. Ivy put on her coat. The evening was cold but calm. Stars were beginning to show above the western prairie, and the snow under her boots had hardened enough to crunch with every step. Half a mile, the same field, the same boundary fence, the same yellow light ahead. But this time Ivy did not need the wire to guide her. She could see Emmett's ranch the entire way. Twice she nearly stopped. The second time, she actually turned her head toward home. Her roof stood dark and solid behind her. She could go back. That mattered. Ivy faced Emmett's light again and kept walking. She knocked with her hand this time. The door opened. Emmett stared at her. Ivy. There it was again, her name without distance in it. She held out the ledger. I stopped keeping it. His eyes dropped to the book. I noticed. That answer irritated her just enough to steady her nerves. You noticed? About the third supper. You could have said something. Didn't seem wise. Despite herself, Ivy almost smiled. Emmett stepped aside. She entered. The room looked much as it had during the blizzard. Yet without her cooking, there was a certain emptiness to it again. One cup stood beside the coffee pot. His work coat hung from a peg, the seam she had repaired still holding. Ivy placed the ledger on his table. I owe you an apology. Emmett remained standing. I shouldn't have compared you to him. You were frightened. That doesn't make it fair. No. She appreciated that he did not pretend otherwise. I kept waiting, Ivy said. Every board you brought, every hour you worked. I kept waiting for the moment you'd tell me what it bought you. Emmett's brow tightened. Bought me? Some right to decide, some claim on me. He looked toward the fire. And when I bought the shingles without asking, I handed that fear exactly what it was looking for. Ivy swallowed. You were trying to help. I was. You should have asked. Yes. No defense, no contest. Just the truth laid down between them. Emmett pulled out a chair, but did not tell her to sit. I knew trust would take longer than one storm, Ivy. She looked at him. Then why did you stay away? Because you told me to. I never said those words. You didn't have to. The answer hurt because it was true. Emmett rubbed one hand over the worn edge of the table, and because staying away is something I'm good at. Ivy waited. For 2 years, he continued, I told myself I was respecting you. Some of that was true. And the rest? He gave her a tired half-smile. Same as I told you before. Easier standing across a field wondering than crossing it and hearing no. Ivy looked down. They had both hidden behind things that sounded sensible. Her independence, his respect. Both could become walls if carried far enough. She touched the ledger. If you never wanted me to owe you, what did you want? Emmett did not answer immediately. The fire shifted behind the stove door. A log settled. Finally, he looked straight at her. I never wanted you needing me, Ivy. Her fingers tightened around the book. Then what? His voice dropped. I'd like to be wanted. Silence. Not needed. There's the difference. Ivy could hear the watch inside her coat. That imperfect little ticking seemed impossibly loud. All those years she had believed there were only two choices. Depend on someone and risk losing herself. Or depend on nobody and remain safe. Emmett was offering neither. He was asking her to choose. Ivy drew a slow breath. My roof's nearly finished. I know. The wall is sound. I know. I can sleep in my own bed tonight, cook my own supper tomorrow, run my cattle and my accounts without you. A flicker crossed his face, but he did not look away. I know that too. She stepped closer to the table. That is why I came tonight. Emmett went very still. Ivy looked past him toward the little kitchen where, weeks earlier, she had stood in his oversized shirt and bargained for the right to remain beneath his roof. Back then she had nowhere else to go. Tonight she had a home waiting across the field, a repaired roof, her own land, her own choice. She looked at Emmett. What if I kept cooking anyway? For once, Emmett Larkin seemed to have no answer ready. He glanced toward the stove, then back at her. Depends, Ivy waited. You planning to keep putting that much salt in the biscuits? Her mouth fell open. You ate every one. Didn't say I lacked courage. A laugh escaped her, soft and nervous, and some of the tightness went out of the room. Then Ivy became serious again. My roof is repaired, Emmett nodded. My cattle are mine, my land is mine. Tomorrow morning I can walk back across that field, make my own breakfast, and never owe you another board or nail. I know. And suppose I didn't want to. Emmett's expression changed. He did not cross the room. He did not reach for her. Instead, he placed one hand, palm up, on the table between them. Ivy looked at it. The choice remained entirely hers. Slowly, she laid her hand in his. Only then did his fingers close around hers. How long are you proposing to keep cooking? He asked. Ivy felt the roughness of his palm against her skin. Suppose I didn't put an end date on it. Emmett drew one quiet breath. Stay forever. The words were barely above a whisper. Ivy's eyes lifted to his. Emmett stepped closer. Not because your roof came down. Not because winter scared you. Not because you need my ranch. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. And not because I need somebody standing over my stove. That last part is debatable. A faint smile touched his mouth. I want Ivy Marrow, the woman who counts every nail, argues with perfectly sound lumber advice, and apparently intends to defend those biscuits until Judgment Day. Her eyes burned suddenly. Emmett's smile disappeared. Marry me, Ivy. Not because either one of us needs rescuing, because I'd rather face whatever storms come next beside you. For 3 years, Ivy had believed saying yes to a man meant surrendering something. Standing there, she understood that this yes asked her to surrender nothing except the distance between them. Yes. Emmett remained still, as though he needed to hear it without hope interfering. Ivy squeezed his hand. Yes, Emmett. He bent toward her slowly. She met him halfway. Their first kiss was quiet, warm, and unhurried. Outside, the Dakota night remained perfectly still. By spring, snowmelt ran through the low ground between their claims. They married on that very boundary. Mrs. Fenwick arrived in her best dark blue dress and announced that she deserved some credit for having understood the matter before either bride or groom. Silas Cobb brought lumber for 2 long wedding tables. When Ivy asked the price, he looked offended. Miss Marrow, I've charged for lumber since before Larkin could grow whiskers. Let an old man surprise himself once. Ivy's hand moved automatically toward the little ledger she still carried. Emmett noticed. Their eyes met. Ivy stopped. Then she closed the book. Mrs. Fenwick laughed first. Others followed. Ivy did too. Marriage did not erase the Marrow claim. Emmett never asked it to. They worked both properties as one operation while keeping the history of each intact. Ivy still handled accounts. Emmett still argued about bracing. She still told him when he was wrong. Sometimes he even was. That summer they built a new house on the rise near the old boundary fence. The roof was reinforced against the north wind. Twice. Excessive, Ivy said, watching Emmett inspect the second brace. Prudent. Fearful. Married. She laughed and handed him another nail. They saved the old doorframe from her father's kitchen and worked it into the new house. It bore scratches, old nail holes, and 20 years of weather, but Ivy ran her fingers over it every morning as she passed through. Her father's pocket watch took its place on the mantel. It never learned to keep proper time. They wound it anyway. The ledger stayed too. Its pages now held figures for seed, calves, fence posts, feed, and planting dates. There was no column for supper, no account for coffee. Nothing recording the evenings when Emmett came in tired, and Ivy simply moved her chair closer to his. Almost a year passed. Then, one January afternoon, Ivy stepped onto the porch and saw a gray line forming along the northern horizon. Wind stirred loose snow across the yard. Emmett came out behind her. They stood watching the sky darken. "Storm's coming," he said. Once, those words would have sent Ivy checking every latch herself. She would have counted feed, wood, blankets, water, and every other thing required to prove she could endure whatever came. Now she looked toward the barn. Livestock secured, wood stacked, shutters fastened. 2 sets of hands had done the work. Ivy leaned against Emmett's shoulder. "Let it come." He looked down at her. She turned toward the warm lamplight spilling through the window of the house they had built between 2 lives that neither had been required to surrender. "I've got exactly where I want to weather it." Behind them, her father's watch ticked from the mantel. A little slow, a little battered, still going. The first snow began to fall. Emmett opened the door. Ivy went inside beside him. And this time, there was no half-mile left between them. Maybe that's why their story stays with us. Because most of us know what it's like to build a fence around some wounded part of ourselves. Maybe yours came after someone broke a promise. Maybe you learned that depending on people could hurt. So you became the one who carried every burden, solved every problem, and quietly told yourself you were better off needing nobody. Ivy had survived that way for years, but Emmett never asked her to become smaller so he could feel stronger. He didn't want gratitude mistaken for love. He waited until her roof was sound, her feet were steady, and she was completely free to walk home. Only then could her staying mean what it was supposed to mean. Sometimes love isn't finding someone you cannot live without. Sometimes it's finding the person you could live without, and realizing you would rather share the road, the work, the quiet mornings, and whatever storms are still waiting beyond the horizon. If you had been Ivy, would you have crossed that field a second time? Tell me in the comments. I'd truly like to know. And if stories of second chances, quiet courage, and love found in unexpected places mean something to you, you're always welcome to subscribe and ride with us again. There are more moving, mysterious, and healing stories waiting down the trail. Until next time, may you have the strength to stand alone when you must, and the courage to recognize the right hand when it's offered in love.